At what point does design decrease practicality? Many would argue that the ultimate Samsung Galaxy was the S5 from 2014, a phone that, while not bad looking, didn't match the premium nature of its competitors, but was about as practical as it got. I'd argue that this was the final Galaxy to put function over form, but can this phone still be useful in modern times?
Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy S5, Samsung's final plastic phone. How does it hold up well over 6 years later? 2014 was kind of a turning point in smartphones, carrying over from progression in 2013. The Galaxy S4 came out the year before and still stands as the second best-selling smartphone of all time, behind the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus that came out in 2014. Apple moving into the phablet market really took a chunk out of Samsung's base, but that didn't stop the S5 from being a very popular option back in the day. Most considered it not to be the nicest looking. In fact, I myself remember laughing at the fact that Samsung was still using plastic. And in all fairness, there was a reason to be annoyed by that, and the next year with the S6, Samsung finally moved to a more premium look. But what the S5 lacked in style, it more than made up for in functionality. We're talking an easily removable back and battery, an SD card slot, water resistance, a basic but straightforward design, no glass on the back means it's going to be tougher than newer Galaxies, and it's also quite easy to repair. The S6 the next year took away a lot of these features, and fans weren't happy about it, which led the S7 to find kind of a middle ground. But this phone stands out nowadays in the world of glass, aluminum, and stainless steel. The display is absolutely gorgeous and still holds up in my opinion, even today. The S5 is quite behind in updates. Actually, we're talking really behind with Android 6 Marshmallow. That is bad, really bad, and it reinforces the fact that despite Samsung making terrific hardware year after year, the lack of software support is not only disappointing, but straight up pathetic. Yes, you can use backdoor methods to get newer versions of Android, but the vast majority will never do that, and Samsung's 2 years of updates is inexcusable. The iPhone 5S, released the year before, as well as the iPhone 6, were up to date all the way until late 2019 with iOS 12 to put things in perspective. Is that what we're looking at here? Decent hardware that's just way too behind in updates? Could you even use it today? Well, yeah, you could if you had to. It has LTE, so it'll connect to whatever carrier you want it to. In theory, the S5 could be your daily driver. It just wouldn't be a very good experience. But perhaps I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let's start with the design. Originally, I wrote the S5's design was its worst aged aspect, but I removed that because I actually don't think it's true. Yes, plastic is pretty hard to swallow, and the thick bezels on the top and bottom are not terribly appealing, but the trade-off for easily replaceable batteries and micro SD card is just about worth it, and believe it or not, I actually like this design. The plastic feels good in the hand, being grippy and comfortable to hold. The camera bump is extremely minimal. I mean, compare that to the Note 20 Ultra. My least favorite part of the design isn't the plastic, but the Samsung logo on the front of the display under the speaker. I don't know why Samsung used to do this. I've always found it to be a bit of an eyesore myself, but it does come down to personal preference, and they have gotten rid of it as the bezels have slimmed down. The phone is very light, and the dimpled plastic on the back is held in place by a frame that looks metallic, but it isn't. It's plastic, yeah. You could be excused for being fooled. I actually was at first, but after you feel it in the hand, it's pretty clear. On the top of the phone, you've got that headphone jack, and on the bottom, you'll notice something that you may never have seen on any phone before, and that's a charging port cover. I didn't even know this was ever a thing. It's here for water resistance reasons, and it's a clever workaround to avoid getting water in there before tech improved to the point that this wasn't needed. The jack doesn't need a cover as it is coated internally to keep the water out. After charging your phone with micro USB, you get a pop-up reminding you to put the cover back on, which is kind of annoying if anything. I mean, how often are you going to keep it off? It just kind of hangs there and would be uncomfortable to use. Looking at the front of the phone, we have a 5.1-inch AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080 by 1920. The screen is still pretty good looking thanks to the vibrant OLED panel and impressive pixel density of 432 pixels per inch. The phone actually feels a bit small compared to phones we have nowadays, but at the time the Galaxy line was known for headlining the phablet trend. Of course the Notes were even bigger, but these phones were still quite large compared to the phones most people were upgrading from. The screen is very good, and while it does have that oversaturated look Samsung's used to be very famous for, there's no question it really pops when you turn it on. The colors features are very in your face. That's not a bad thing here, and I think this display is comparable somewhat, at least, to what we have today. I do know a lot of older Samsungs in general do have burn-in now. This is just an issue with OLED tech, and if you left your phone on a singular image for too long, it does tend to burn into the display. If for some reason you do get this phone nowadays, try to avoid one with burn-in, because it can be a bit of an annoyance. Luckily, as far as I can tell, my phone here doesn't seem to have it. The home button contains the fingerprint sensor, and it's one of the most annoying I've ever had the displeasure of using. The phone came out in the early days of smartphone biometrics, so it's difficult to fault it completely, but it can be extremely finicky to use, as you have to swipe your finger slowly over the home button, and it never seems to work. With the S6, all you had to do was just press the home button. That was much better the next year. But this one is just awful, and it feels like Samsung just crammed it in here because iPhones had it. One thing this phone has that iPhones never had is a heart rate monitor on the back. This is cool and fairly simple to use through the Samsung Health app, which actually offers a whole plethora of other health tracking features. But right above that heart rate monitor is the camera, and so let's talk about it. There's a single lens on the back that boasts 16 megapixels, which is a higher count than many current phone cameras, including the iPhone 11 Pro Max. Now, a higher megapixel count doesn't mean better pictures, but they will be larger resolution. Pictures are okay, not that good considering what we have now, but about what I'd expect from a 2014 smartphone. I won't go too in depth here, you can see for yourself. It could do the job if you needed it to, but I'd quickly be reaching for a better camera when possible. The phone actually films video in 4K, which is very impressive for 2014, although the video itself is fairly mediocre. Still, the resolution is impressive, and that's worth noting. The selfie camera on the front of the phone has 2 megapixels, and wow, this is bad. 2014 smartphones and bad selfies were definitely the norm, but considering the back has 16 megapixels, I wish they had improved it. So the camera, it's typical of the era. Samsung generally in the past wasn't the best when it came to smartphone photography, and while I do think they've gotten quite a bit better in recent years, the S5 hasn't aged the best in this department. When it comes to the hardware of the S5, there's no question that it was impressive back in early 2014. We have a Snapdragon 801 processor and 2 gigabytes of RAM, good enough to get the S5 from Android 4 KitKat to Android 6 Marshmallow and no further. As said before, the amount of software support Samsungs have historically gotten is pretty darn pathetic, and unfortunately the S5 is no exception, despite hardware that should have been more capable of going further. As far as software goes, Marshmallow isn't too different from newer Android, but gosh darn if I hate this skin with the TouchWiz UI Samsung has put on it. Everything feels so unintuitive. The settings app, for example, look at this. This is awful. You need to scroll through and every setting has an individual circular icon, and it goes on forever. There's so darn many, and then you tap one, and you have a ton more confusing settings to scroll through. If you don't somewhat know what you're doing, it'd be impossible to navigate. There is something that piqued my interest in the easy mode. I switched over and quickly realized it wasn't for me. Icons are bigger, there's no dock, and you have contacts on the far left screen. Honestly, I actually like this a lot. I know I said it wasn't for me, but it's not for advanced users. But I imagine people unfamiliar with smartphones, such as grandparents, and don't forget this came out in 2014, so many people hadn't even had a smartphone yet, this would have been useful. It's a fairly simple, easy way to use your phone, but the setting is somewhat hidden, and if I had to guess, many never even knew it existed. The software actually runs okay, all things considered, not a ton of slowdowns, and I think that's just mainly because this phone is a little bit overpowered for Marshmallow. But hey, I won't complain about lack of slowdown. When you think of double tapping the home button, you probably think of a view of all your apps open. Not here, instead that brings up S-Voice, Samsung's very early version of a Google Assistant / Siri-like AI assistant. And it might be okay if it weren't for the fact that Google Assistant is already there when you hold down the home button. So if you double tap the home button, you get Samsung Assistant. If you hold it down, you get Google Assistant. Why on earth are these both included at the same time? This is even worse than Bixby, because at least Bixby is kind of useful compared to this, at least. I don't know. Of course, you don't need multitasking to open with a double tap the home button, because we have buttons beside the home button. Now, as ugly as I find these, they're very practical, and it means you don't need to have a navigation bar above the bottom bezel like you saw on many other Androids of the era. For example, look at the first Pixel. It's got this giant bottom bezel with absolutely nothing on it, and then right above it is the home bar, so why not just put the home button on that big giant bezel? Anyways, the back button is a feature Android users have always raved about, and it's here in all its regressive glory. Regressive in that it moves you backwards on your phone, not that it's a bad thing. I actually do like having it. The buttons light up when you use them and then slowly fade so that they're just visible without being too obvious. On the Google Play Store, you can still download the majority of apps, and for any that you can't, you should be able to find an older APK if you look online. So this phone is usable today. It's not the fastest fastest, and if you try to do anything somewhat modern, you can definitely feel the slowdown. You're not going to be playing Fortnite on this thing. 2 GB of RAM is a little bit tough to deal with, but on Marshmallow, it is more than enough. All in all, I've been pretty impressed with the Samsung Galaxy S5. It certainly is the end of an era, the final plastic Galaxy S phone, and considered by many to be one of the best, for the easy customizability and impressive feature set. Nearly 7 years later, it doesn't hold up to the greatest anymore, but no one would expect it to. It served its purpose for the time, and no one should really be using this phone anymore. But if you had to, you could, and that in and of itself is an accomplishment. This phone will forever be the final representation of the plastic Samsung era, or it would be if it wasn't for the $1,000 Galaxy Note 20. Yeah, that phone has a plastic back for some reason. I won't talk much about it, but I do find it pretty darn ridiculous. A $1,000 phone has a plastic back. That is insane. I don't care if there are benefits to it, it doesn't fit on a $1,000 phone. Sorry, not anymore. A cheap or even mid-tier phone to cut costs? Sure, plastic works fine on that. The Pixel 4a, for example. Samsung calls the back glastic, but putting makeup on a pig doesn't make it any less of a pig, and I think that old saying applies here. But that's just my opinion, of course. I won't rant too much about it. This video is supposed to be about the S5. Actually, speaking of that, I'm pretty much done here. I feel like as a kid, I didn't give this phone enough credit. I didn't take it very seriously because it was just plastic. But there's a lot of benefits that come with that, and I think that's something that a lot of people probably would have preferred to the premium nature of newer Samsung phones. Being able to so easily just remove the back. I mean, look at this. There you go, done. Remove the back. You swap the battery. You could carry multiple batteries on your person and just swap through them if you really needed to. I'm not saying phones should be like this anymore, and of course some cheaper phones are like this, but I do understand people that enjoyed this feature set. And so as much as plastic makes me cringe, I'm finally willing to give the S5 a pass for it, because it's a pretty decent phone. But what do you think of the Galaxy S5? And more specifically, the old plastic backing with the dimples on it. Do you miss it? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you'd like to for some reason. And we also have a Discord channel. You should come check it out. Link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.